Summer 1953. It's a sunny afternoon in your tree-lined neighborhood of suburbia, USA. You've been running around with your friends all morning, climbing trees and playing catch in this sticky weather. You're feeling hungry, so you head back home for a snack. You arrive at your two-story house lined with a white picket fence and a pristine front lawn. You open the door, and your golden retriever is the first one to greet you, always excited to see you again. Your mother has been preparing for the church bake sale all day, and the smell of sugar and butter is in the air. You head into the kitchen, and she's decorating her famous cherry cake. You would love a piece, but it's for the church, so you steal a spoonful of the pink icing instead. Years have gone by, and now you're a grown man making a living in the big city. But once in a while, on hot summer days, you still remember the taste of that cherry icing from simpler times. And then you wake up. It's 2023, and you're watching a cake decorating video on YouTube. You weren't around in the 1950s, your parents weren't even around in the 1950s. In fact, you're not even American, and you've never been to the US in your entire life. Your mother barely knows how to use an oven, let alone how to bake a cherry cake. This is not your memory. But why does it feel like it is? Really, every time I watch your videos, I have flashbacks of these non-existent childhood memories of my mother baking a cake for me. A two-story house, backyard with a retriever running around. A tear falls down my cheek that tastes as sweet as my mother's cake. But the only thing my Korean mother has ever baked for me in real life are potatoes. I enjoy your happy videos. Crying symbol. I made up this entire scenario based off of a comment I read under a cake decorating video on YouTube. And mind you, it's not even an American channel. It's actually a Korean YouTube channel for a cafe that sells desserts and cakes. This commenter is obviously Korean, and unless they're 80 years old, which is highly unlikely, they probably weren't around in the 1950s, and they most definitely did not grow up in the American suburbs during the mid-century. I thought it was hilarious and so elaborately detailed, but it also touched on a very interesting point. We are essentially living in an era where we experience nothing but miss everything. Referencing the past is nothing new, and it's almost a teenage stereotype to say that you were born in the wrong generation. But millennials and Gen Z have taken nostalgia to the next level, where contemporary youth culture is almost all driven by markers of the past. But even between millennials and Gen Z, there is somewhat of a difference in their penchant for nostalgia, especially between older millennials and younger Gen Zers. Most millennials grew up in a kind of in-between time period where their childhoods were still touched by the analog and shared collective cultural experiences. Computers and the internet were starting to permeate people's lives, but the children of the 80s and 90s still grew up writing their essays by hand until some point, taking notes in these composition books, following the same musicians and pop stars, and watching the same TV shows after school. Disney Animation, MTV and TRL, Harry Potter, the Twilight series, WB shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, and Dawson's Creek. These were all major pop culture markers of people growing up in the 90s and early 2000s in America. You may not have been a particular fan of any of these, but you were at least aware that they were popular, and there was a shared cultural experience within that knowledge. Even in the mid to late 2000s, when internet usage became a part of everyday life, there was still a feeling that the internet was something you used for fun rather than the all encompassing necessity that it is now. But within the span of less than a decade, everything changed. The Paradox of Choice is a book written by American psychologist Barry Schwartz, and it talks about how the explosion of choices we have on everything, from big life steps like what career to choose or what to study in university, all the way to how many types of cereals are available in our supermarket aisles, have made us more anxious rather than make us feel more free. If you've ever felt paralyzed by having too many options while staring down at the 50 different brands of cereals available in your local supermarket, imagine having an endless amount of different options to choose from in every aspect of your life. It's not 50 different brands to choose from in your local store anymore. It's hundreds of thousands of brands to choose from in an infinite number of websites, social media platforms, and online marketplaces. This is the world that Gen Zers were born into, and understandably, there is a deep longing for a simpler time when faced with so many choices all at once. And when the present day feels so overwhelming, we tend to look to the past that feels simpler, not necessarily because life wasn't complicated or hard back then, too, but because there's a comfort you can find by leaning onto the things you're familiar with. There's no uncertainty or anxiety in the past. You already know all the answers. If Juicy Couture, Abercrombie and Fitch, Hot Topic, and Ed Hardy were brands that marked teenagehood in the 2000s, those same brands are the ones that teenagers in the 2010s and 2020s are waxing nostalgic over, which is not something that happened with previous generations to this degree. And it's not only with fashion, but everything from music genres like emo or pop punk has come back into trend. And even old TV shows from previous decades like Friends or Sex and the City are still going strong with the younger generation. Previous generations may have been introduced to older music and media through their parents, but they don't necessarily create entire lifestyle aesthetics around older generations' teenagers in the same capacity as Gen Zers do with millennial youth culture. And I don't necessarily think this is because millennial youth culture is particularly more attractive than any other generations. I think it's more because millennial youth culture has been documented online pretty well because their childhoods and teenagehoods took place in a time when the full on digital age was starting to happen. Also, older Gen Zers were around during this time as well, and they may be more familiar with 2000s popular culture and have it within their memories, but would have been too young to actively participate in it. So it's not surprising that the 90s and the 2000s are the trendiest eras to reference at the moment because there's just a lot of reference available in general. Pre-internet era, cultures used to be a lot more local. How people dressed, what people listened to, what people watched were much more influenced by the region they were in and the people around them. Nowadays, I might be watching a YouTube channel with millions of subscribers, and my best friend might have never even heard of it. Celebrities are still around, but we don't have superstars anymore. We just have attractive, famous people. I would say the only genre of media that still has a similar kind of dedicated fan base is probably K-pop, where people are incredibly loyal to their biases in the same way as fans of Western boy bands and teenage pop stars were back in the day. But even the rise of K-pop in the West is a sign of cultural diffusion as well, combined with strategic global marketing, where things don't stay contained within certain regions, but have the capacity to reach across the globe to much wider audiences. And with the history of the world contained within just a tap on your phone, that nostalgic feeling, that longing for the past doesn't just stop with different time periods you're personally familiar with, but reaches beyond borders to different countries even. That's why you have a Korean viewer daydreaming about 1950s suburban American life while watching a cake decorating video, or have a 20 something year old college student living in Boston who has never stepped foot in Asia before listening to 80s Japanese city pop while studying for their exams. The collective experiences of generations past across the globe are available for younger generations everywhere now to consume online all at once. And although you might have never been there, it sure feels like you were. In fact, you kind of wish that you were. Everybody in every generation feels nostalgia to some degree, but this intense attachment to the past, sometimes a past that you haven't even experienced, is something that's relatively unique to the younger generations of today. The children of the 2000s were born into a purely digital era where culture is consumed online rather than experienced in real life. Everybody lives within their own customized internet bubble, and there are no real defining cultural markers that's shared as a collective. This lack of shared experiences, combined with the availability of so much information, so many voices online at once, is like being in a big city overwhelmed and surrounded by people, but feeling completely alone at the same time. If there is a shared experience at all, it's this psychological isolation of living within one's own digital space. But then the pandemic happens.
Now to growing concerns about the deadly coronavirus officially hitting the U.S. Here's what we know.
The breaking news: stay at home. That is the order tonight from 4 state governors as the coronavirus pandemic spreads. New York, California, Illinois, and Connecticut all ordering non-essential employees to stay home. Those orders cover 75 million people across the United States.
The coronavirus is the biggest threat this country has faced for decades, and this country is not alone. All over the world, we're seeing the devastating impact of this invisible killer. And so tonight, I want to update you on the latest steps we're taking to fight.
The physical isolation of living through a pandemic is ironically the one ultimate unifying experience that the entire world faced during 2020. You're still lonely, yes, but everybody is lonely together. There's a strange comfort in knowing that everybody is experiencing the same thing, even when it's not a good thing. You're not missing out on anything, there's nothing out there, nobody is doing fun things without you, no one is hanging out with their perfectly curated friend groups or going away on romantic vacations with their perfect partners. Everybody is either at home alone, or if they're living with someone, desperately wanting to be alone. There's no bonding like trauma bonding, you know what I mean? As terrible and scary as this time was, I also had a lot of conflicting emotions where I actually found comfort in being stuck at home all day long and just seeing the world stop for a minute. The rat race took a pause and it was kind of nice. I think this is why some people like myself are feeling nostalgic about lockdown sometimes, even with all the quarantine and the social distancing and in some places even curfews, because while terrible things did happen, there was a widespread understanding, more so than any other time in our lives, that our everyday grind, our daily stresses just did not matter. And there were more important things in life that we should be focusing on, like our long-term happiness, our health, our families, our relationships, our communities, or the lack thereof. So now that things are pretty much back to normal and the rat race has started up again like nothing ever happened, I can't help but look back at a time when everything came to a quiet standstill. If there's anything this weird lockdown nostalgia can give us, it's this reckoning that nostalgia is sometimes not about happy memories, but rooted in the feeling that our present day often feels meaningless and empty. So empty, in fact, that you yearn for a time when horrible things were happening, but at least it was important and we were dealing with things that truly mattered. Obviously, just because you follow Y2K trends or collect vintage game consoles doesn't mean that you're living in despair or swimming in existential crises. Or maybe you are. But it's more a larger reflection of our time, in my opinion, and an expression of longing for a more grounded, substantial reality that seems to be missing for a lot of people at this moment. Thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe for more.